understand how all of the functional parts of our movement work, it's time to disassemble it. It's important to fully disassemble a clock movement when you clean and service it. You can't see wear and damage to the various parts unless you disassemble the movement and inspect them. It's also difficult to remove all the dirt around those close-fitting parts like pivots and bushings without taking them apart. Any dirt left in moving parts will increase friction and wear and reduce the life of the movement. The first step in the disassembly process is to capture the mainspring, probably the most dangerous component of your clock movement. With an enormous amount of stored energy, the spring can break a finger or rip the skin right off your hands if it's not controlled. A mainspring can shatter, sending sharp bits of metal flying. Always wear gloves and safety glasses when working with clock springs. This is a letdown key. Its smooth handle lets it freely rotate in your hand. Never use a regular winding key with finger wings as a letdown key. You could tear the skin off your hands or break a finger. This is a mainspring clamp. When we slip it around the mainspring, it will contain the power of the mainspring, making the movement safe to work on. We'll have to take the movement out of the movement holder. So first thing we need to do is remove the pendulum bob and maybe even the pendulum rod and suspension spring. The suspension spring is so thin and delicate that if we attempt to move the movement around with the pendulum attached, it'll probably damage the suspension spring and we'd have to replace it. This goes for all clocks with pendulums. Never move the clock with the pendulum attached. Now it's safe to take the movement out of the movement holder and place it face up on a flat work surface. Next, we want to remove the clock hands from the center arbor. They're easy to bend, and we don't want to damage them while working with the mainspring. The minute hand is held onto the center arbor by either a taper pin or a nut. Unscrew the nut, and the minute hand will just fall off the center arbor. Examine the tip of the center arbor, and you'll see there is a small square-shaped area. The hole in the base of the minute hand is square as well. The square shape allows you to move the minute hand without it slipping on the arbor when you set the time. Next, remove the hour hand. The hour hand is pressed onto the hour pipe. Remove it by pulling it straight off. It's a friction fit and it may be tight, so it may take a bit of force. Once you have both hands removed, set them aside where they won't get lost. To clamp the mainspring, first we need to wind it 80 or 90%, but not fully wound tight. It's not that we'll damage the mainspring by winding it tight. It's that we need a couple of turns left in the spring to release the click in a later step. Next, we need to disengage the click spring. This is most easily done with needle nose pliers or stout tweezers. Just grab the spring and move it away from the click. Now work the clamp around until it fully encircles the spring. Using one hand, hold the movement securely with your thumb holding the clamp in place on the mainspring. Now with your letdown key in the other hand, turn the winding arbor a quarter turn or so. With no spring to return it, the click won't re-engage the ratchet, and you can begin to release the mainspring. Very slightly release your grip on the letdown key and allow it to spin slowly in your hand. This will expand the mainspring into the clamp. As the spring expands, try to keep the clamp in the center of the spring so it won't escape. When the letdown key stops turning, all the power of the spring will be held by the clamp and no power will be on the wheel train. Our next step is to record the physical placement of all the parts in the clock so that we have a road map to follow when it's time to reassemble it. We don't want any parts left over, nor do we want to waste a lot of time scratching our heads wondering where some obscure part goes. I recommend a digital camera. Nothing special, a pocket camera or a cell phone will do. Take photos of all 6 sides of the clock, front, top, bottom, left, and right sides. Take shots from at least 2 different angles, straight on and approximately 45 degrees. A straight on shot shows a vertical post as a single dot, which is difficult to distinguish from a pivot. A shot taken from an angle will clearly show the post. Make sure that you get a good shot of the mainsprings and the direction they are installed, as well as the clicks and ratchet wheels. Our next step is to remove any other parts mounted to the outside of the movement. In our case, the only thing remaining is the escapement anchor assembly. With the movement face up on a flat surface, move the anchor retaining clip away from the anchor and lift the anchor assembly off of the pallet cock post. Now carefully pull the taper pins or remove the nuts on the plate you are going to remove and set them aside. Carefully work the plates apart until you can pull the plate you are removing completely free of the movement. Do everything you can to make sure that all the wheels stay in place in the remaining plate. Since the escape wheel in our movement is on the outside of the plate we're removing, it will come off with the plate. That's okay, but once the plate is free, reinstall it in its proper position with the rest of the wheels. Take several photos of the open movement from different angles. Now is the time for us to look for things that will help us reassemble the clock. Once it's fully apart, it's too late. The most obvious thing you might notice is that the wheels get smaller as they progress from the great wheel up to the escape wheel. Notice how every wheel engages a pinion. The great wheel engages the pinion on the second arbor, the second wheel engages the pinion on the third arbor, and so forth up the wheel train. See these two wheels that are the same size? We'll be able to tell where they go because wheels have to engage pinions. The Motion Works has cut pinions, and the wheel train has lantern pinions. Paying attention to these small points will help when you put your movement back together. Okay, we're ready to complete disassembling our movement. Pull the hour pipe off of the center arbor. See the cannon pinion and center wheel beneath it? Remove the center arbor and the transfer wheel. Keep all these parts together and set them aside. Next, remove the going train one wheel at a time, starting with the escape wheel. Finally, remove the great wheel and mainspring. It's possible to disassemble the center arbor, but it's not critical. The moving parts only function when the time is being set, so they don't add friction to the going train when the clock is running normally. If you do disassemble the center arbor, be sure to document the order of the springs and washers.